Good morning. I'm Kevin Walker, Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Overland Park Chamber. With me today is Mary Sinclair, a candidate for the Shawnee Mission Board of Education. Today we're going to spend some time getting to know Mary and learn about her candidacy and her priorities if elected to the school board. Mary, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start by having you take a few minutes to introduce yourself and tell us why you're running for the Shawnee Mission School Board.
Okay, great, thank you. So Mary Sinclair, and I'm running for re-election to the Shawnee Mission School Board, so I'm finishing up my first term. And I currently serve as the Vice President of the school board. The way I'd like to think about kind of orienting my desire and passion to support Shawnee Mission schools and public education really stems from my commitment to quality public education, providing quality public education that's accessible and welcoming to all students. It's been a lifelong priority of mine. It's kind of reflected in both my professional and community service choices. So that's kind of where I'd like to start.
Let's transition to a few questions now. As a candidate, what are your top policy priorities?
Okay, thank you. Another good question. I was just reflecting back onto the questionnaire that we also got to fill out, and I realized I focused my questions from a broader public education advocacy perspective, just thinking about what do we need from the state to have quality public schools. So from a state perspective, commitment to restoration of funding for public education, commitment to the Gannon Agreement, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. So from a state perspective, that really allows our public education and our local school boards to be very planful, to know what kind of funding we have coming ahead of us, to know that there's a commitment from the state to public education. So that's been a really critical component of maintaining quality public education in Kansas. From a local school board perspective, one of the primary reasons why I'm running is to maintain our commitment to the 2019 community-driven strategic plan that was passed, and to continue the work of the district towards creating an opportunity for every student to be college and career ready, which is the essence of the strategic plan.
You mentioned the Gannon decision, and the Supreme Court ruled that K-12 education funding is both equitable and adequate. The court, however, has retained jurisdiction over the case to assure that funding is maintained. What are your thoughts on the formula and the additional funding that's been added?
Okay, I believe it's really important that we adhere to the agreement of the Gannon resolution, which was finalized in, I believe, July 2019. And you mentioned, you ask about additional funds. Really, what I would portray that as restoration of funding. We lost significant amount of money between 2009 and 2015 in relation to the Great Recession, and then followed by the 2012 tax policy that really changed the revenue stream for Kansas. That in turn impacted the availability of funds for Kansas public schools, which in any state is about 50% of general fund revenues, really goes towards public education. So the Gannon Agreement in my mind was an evidence-based study that looked at what are our outcomes, what kinds of costs are associated with those outcomes. It was, I think, verified through multiple cost function analyses is the cost study that they do to determine the adequacy. And so through the Gannon resolution, we are on a 6-year phase-in, so it's not quite as tight as the Montoy resolution that really kind of fell apart after the Great Recession, so we had to start over again with Gannon to a certain extent. And so that restoration is really critical. It's important. You can see what kinds of decisions school districts have been able to make in terms of planning and budgeting over the years. Shawnee Mission has been able to restore things like getting our teachers back to, our secondary teachers back to teaching 5 out of 7 courses instead of 6 out of 7, and really what that means is they have much more bandwidth to personalize learning, to do planning and preparation and collaboration. So it's so critical for us to achieve our outcomes for the district, to be able to give our teachers the time and resources to be able to be effective at their job. It's allowed us to restore to continue and slowly to restore supports for the social and emotional well-being of our students. So we're still working towards restoring social workers, bringing on more counselors. We've accelerated that a little bit in Shawnee Mission through the federal relief funding. So another topic we could talk about, but building in those pieces and those critical staff members that allow us to achieve our goals has been a really valuable outcome of the Gannon Agreement, and bringing our funding back up to 2009 levels adjusted for inflation. So my recap of Gannon is we're getting back to square, and we're still not there. It'll be 2023 when we have a constitutional level of funding. So just to put it in perspective, my kids went all the way through the Shawnee Mission School District, and in that 20-year period, our schools were never funded at a constitutional level. So we had a number of people really bending over, going the extra mile to provide those supports our kids need to be successful.
You know, along with funding comes accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And the K through 12 education system requires accountability
Yes.
measures for student performance, and sometimes that's been a source of debate.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the accountability measures you support and that you believe are accurately reflective of student achievement?
I would love to. From trying to understand the effectiveness and impact of public education, Kansas and each school district looks at multiple metrics. So when we think about our portrait of a graduate, and Shawnee Mission just refreshed our portrait of a graduate, we want kids not only to have kind of those skills and competencies and those in terms of math and language arts and social studies and along those lines. Our community has repeatedly told us that those interpersonal skills are super critical for our students as well. So our strategic plan looks at how do we help kids provide that personalized learning, that ownership, that opportunity for them to help, for students help to develop their own path forward towards whether it's college or career or some kind of combination of both in terms of readiness. And so from that accountability perspective, we need to understand the extent to which kids have a personalized learning plan. That's really important to know that that's in place. And to look at whether our students are graduating, whether all students are graduating, to what degree are students participating in extracurricular activities, engaging in rigorous coursework. If we look at what's predictive and what's of successful students, whether career or college, a lot of it has to do with their GPA and the courses they take, and again, that extracurricular participation. So all those pieces are important. We're also measuring kind of that well-being component. So the Shawnee Mission adopted the Panorama, which is a survey that assesses some of those social emotional kinds of skills and climate, relationship with teachers. That's a really important metric to have because it's an important outcome we want. All those pieces go along, are as important or to help us understand whether our kids are being successful going on to post-secondary or career, along with the Kansas assessment, which is kind of the other piece that's been a big topic of debate. If I could talk a little bit more about the Kansas assessment, there's a lot of misinformation about that. So what I want to say about trying to understand whether our kids are making academic progress, if we want to know, are the at-risk students in Shawnee Mission making progress? Are the funds that we receive from the state around those at-risk students helping those kids make meaningful growth? The metric that allows us to answer that question is it's a standardized assessment, but it's an adaptive assessment. And what I mean by that is that it's a tool that is it's questions, say around math, that we ask standardized questions at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, sometimes at the middle of the year. So the tool that Shawnee Mission uses, and I would probably say maybe half across the state, is called the MAP test, and it's out of the Northwest Educational, one of the regional assessment centers. And then, so the MAP is a tool, it's a standardized assessment that shows us that growth. And it's called an adaptive metric. And that is what gives us the answer that I think some of our legislators want to know and our community members want to know. There's another assessment, standardized assessment, the Kansas assessment. That's also a requirement as part of the accountability model. That's a lag indicator. And it's another tool, and it's a snapshot of all kids in grades 3 through 8, as well as 10th grade. And that tool was re-normed in 2019, in conjunction with KU and the Department of Education, when the Kansas Department of Education adopted the Kansas CAN vision for public education. And when that was renormed, one of the goals of the Kansas CAN vision was very aspirational. We want to be the first in the state, the first in the country, the first in the world in terms of outcomes for our kids for public education. Kansas values public education. The Kansas assessment, they're called cut scores. So have you heard of the level 1, 2, 3, 4, that conversation? These are what are referred to as cut scores, or it tells us how, some information about how our students are performing in relation to our expectations. What do we want every kid to know and be able to do once they graduate from high school? To be ready for college or career. Those assessment cut scores were renormed in relation to our aspirational goals. So the first three, from the highest, level 4, 3, 2, those three categories are a level of preparedness for college and career. So a student scoring level 2, 3, and 4 is, by kind of function of other correlations, determined that those kids are prepared to do well in college, to take, to be able to manage and to achieve in college level courses. Those three have categorical terms. One is called, basic readiness, effective readiness, to exceptional readiness. There's a debate about what this level 2 means. And I'm sorry, I'm getting into the weeds, but do you mind if I keep going down this path a little bit? So I appreciate, you might want to fast forward through this part. But so our kids who score in level 1 tell us that they need a little bit more work. So that's 10th grade. Those kids are taking that test. They might need a little bit more work in language arts and mathematics to be prepared for college and career. And we have 2 more years to do that, right? Because that's grades 11 and 12 that we can continue to work with those students. Students who score level 2 in the math or language arts assessments have those basic skills to succeed. In 2015, it was the university and the Department of Education, that was a predictive description of how kids will do, because they didn't, we didn't have time. We needed years in between to determine really what those levels were predictive of. We know now that our students in all of our regional universities and colleges and technical colleges across Kansas score level 2, 3, and 4. All those kids are doing well in college. So we now have predictive evidence, or actual evidence, that demonstrates that kids who score level 2, 3, and 4, they're doing fine in college, they're succeeding, they're doing, they have achieved kind of those basic skills and competencies that will allow them to do well. And that's about 80% of our students in Shawnee Mission, for sure, by grade 10. So I think there's some misconfusion, there's some misunderstanding about what those levels mean and how predictive they are, and under what context do we interpret that information.
You've mentioned a couple of times career and career readiness, and Kansas is experiencing almost historically low unemployment rates right now. Employers are struggling to find workers, especially in the skilled and technical trades. So how do you see the district helping the business community to meet its future workforce needs?
I hope that we continue along the path that seems to be emerging and growing stronger, actually, in the state of Kansas. I know we have a long history of career tech ed and that kind of partnership between school and business and industry. There's a number of additional initiatives I think that are growing and strengthening. Kauffman Foundation has a real-world learning initiative that is involving, I believe it's up to 50 school districts in the metro area, trying to bridge that gap between school and high school and work. So creating those opportunities for client-based projects or work-based experience, internships, externships. So just those folks coming together and developing common language, enhancing tools, that level of communication I think is incredibly powerful. I know in Shawnee Mission, in partnership with our foundation, the Shawnee Mission Education Foundation, we brought on board a half-time business to education coordinator, and so that person can help work with the school and industry to set up those kinds of logistical connections that then would allow teachers to make those things happen for students within the classroom. We also brought on board an additional, I think I mentioned that earlier, we have an additional counselor in every high school, so we're now up to 5 counselors in each high school. And that 5th counselor, their role really is focused on those real-world learning opportunities. And we have in Shawnee Mission, 20% of our students graduate with college credit, 30% I believe graduated with some kind of client-based project experience. By 2023, we want every student to have those experiences, and I believe what we're talking about now is market value assets. So whether it's certification or those kinds of work experiences or college credit. So we have every student realizing that those are opportunities, and we have all the right infrastructure in place so every kid is taking advantage of that.
Outside of funding, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing the district right now?
I believe our focus really on doing the day-to-day work of the strategic plan. And it is a living document in Shawnee Mission. Our aspirational goals to create opportunities for every student, to recognize the diversity that Shawnee Mission students and staff bring to the table every day, and creating that sense of belonging by doing the work of thinking about all of our practices. Are we being inclusive? Are we being equitable in creating opportunities? And through that work, creating that sense of belonging for every student and staff for that matter.
My last question for you before we wrap up is, what makes you uniquely qualified to serve on the board and most distinguishes you from your opponent in the race?
Well, let me speak to what perspectives I'll bring to the table, and I might leave some of that to our voters to discern. What I bring to the table are a couple of pieces. So I have, I mentioned before that quality public education that's accessible and welcoming to all students, lifelong priorities. So this is reflected in professionally. I have a master's in education and PhD in special education, and spent a good part of my professional life focused on research regarding student engagement and dropout prevention. So I've worked with school districts, professionally my entire life in developing those strategies and researching how we can create opportunities for all kids to remain engaged and be successful. I've also spent the last 20 years advocating for public education. So I was very much a part of encouraging the Gannon resolution through work with the Kansas PTA and spending time in Topeka and testifying on behalf of students and parents to convey the importance of restoring funding for public education. It's something we all value, and those funding pieces are there, and also to really encourage the accountability component. There is a piece embedded in the school finance formula that has that cost function analysis embedded in the audit, in that cycle of audits that is done every year by the legislature. I really encourage that remain a component of the audit of the school finance formula. Another piece is my family has been in Shawnee Mission for about 50 years. So my dad is still living and with us and in the house that I grew up in. in the Shawnee Mission East area. I have siblings and nieces and nephews, and my kids were all alumni of Shawnee Mission East, as was I. So we're committed to Shawnee Mission and want to keep that tradition going.
Well, Mary, I want to thank you for spending a little time with me today. And before we close, I want to give you a couple minutes to provide any final thoughts if you'd like.
I'm just going to remind folks that advance voting starts mail-in ballot. You can start mailing in your ballot October 13th. Walk-in voting, I might be jumping on your lead there. In-person voting starts October 23rd, and Election Day is November 2nd.
Well, that's absolutely how I was going to close. So
Sorry about that.
I will just leave it at that and encourage everyone to get out and vote.
Thank you.